Welcome back to my adventures, where every adventure is unique. Today we'll be discussing the Tour du Mont Blanc, my experience, risk versus reward, part 6. Day 8, hiking day 8 and calendar day 11. It was my last day on the Tour du Mont Blanc, although at the time I didn't realize that it would be. It simply ended up that way. If you recall, when I left from Les Chaussées, I had spoken to two of the women at the desk, and they had said not to hike that day because they said it was going to rain. And then they said that the 2 days following, so it was the Tuesday, I was getting ready to hike. And they said not to hike that day, and then they said the next 2 days were going to be more rain. So it probably wasn't going to be until Friday that I could have safely hiked again. And if you recall, I said there were other hikers in the campsite who had decided to basically stop their tour and not complete it because of these weather warnings. And these women know the tour, and they had good access to weather information, so I don't think it was a question of them trying to mislead anybody. I think they were passing on the information that they knew. They knew it was important, so I'm sure they had a relatively good source for it. But their words that it was basically going to rain later in the day, and I thought, well, I will do my best to hike as far as I can before it rains. This was the decision on the morning. I said I would, wake up and see what the weather looked like. If it wasn't raining, then I would, probably go and, hike as far as I could until it rains, and then, decide to pitch a tent and then hike, if possible, the days after. But I wasn't ready to concede defeat and bail, because I had, I should have had at least 2 more days of hiking to do, and the intention was that I would basically go as far as I could on this day until it rained, and then pitch a tent and then start possibly start the next day, depending on again what the weather was like. So that was the decision I made. So I hiked from Les Chaussées back to Trail La Champ, and which Argentière. So basically how it goes, it's Trail La Champ to Argentière to Les Chaussées. That's where the campsite is. Then the tour is at Trail La Champ, so you have to go back through Argentière back to Trail La Champ. So that's what I did. Like I said, this was a small variant to the campsite, so that was about 4 or 5 kilometers each direction. There's the altitude. It's quite low in valley region. Now, because of the events that happened which I discussed quite in depth in the last topic on the Fenêtre des Alpes, I was a bit traumatized, to be honest with you, having seen so many potential accidents and around such a large group of people. The standard route from Trail La Champ, it goes to Tête et Vent, and it does what, there's an infamous ladder section where you climb quite steeply and you get to almost like a sheer rock face, and I think there's like 3 or 4 ladder sections that you climb up to get over this rock face, and that gets you to the Tête au Vent. Like I say, I was still a bit traumatized from the events on the Fenêtre des Alpes. I knew there was a lot of hikers going to the Tête au Vent through the ladder systems. Cicerone had mentioned that it was dangerous because people were, things were getting knocked as like everyone's standing beneath the ladders or climbing on the ladders, and if someone at the top dislodges something, it's basically falling down, and apparently there's some accidents because of it. And if Cicerone is saying there's a problem, it's probably good to take his advice, because I had kind of ignored some of his cautions earlier, and they actually turned out to be truthful. So I started to follow his recommendations and cautions a bit more closely. And then after the events, like I say, on the Fenêtre des Arpets, where lots of hikers were bunching together, and I was a bit shocked at the sort of the nonchalance that a lot of people were sort of. I guess it's the Wham syndrome. It's not going to happen to me, and lots of people were sort of had this sort of illusion or delusion that it was completely safe, nothing can happen. So I kind of added these factors. The other thing was that there was clouds in the sky. It was overcast. The potential for rain was there, and again, climbing the ladders in the rain is not recommended. So I put all these factors together, and I decided there's a variant that leads out of Tres Le Champ, and it goes up. It's sort of like the direct route is through the if Tres Le Champ is here, the direct route comes into the Tête à Vent. It goes up a fairly steep climb, and then you do the ladder section. You get to Tête à Vent. With the Col des Monts, you go to Tres Le Champ, you go past it, and then you pick up another trail that then sort of circumnavigates around. It's quite a steep climb, and then you basically come to the exact same part at Tête à Vent, but you don't have to traverse the ladders or climb the ladders. So, I didn't really want to have to revisit any exciting, adventurous injuries or fatalities on the ladders. So my choice of the day was to basically forego that section and do this circumnavigate of the Col des Monts route. And actually, I liked it a lot. It was, there was very few people on it. Most people were taking the ladders, but it was a really pleasant hike. It was quite steep. You can see here. So you're starting. This is the profile. You're always seeing the profile on the map on the bottom here. So you're starting down here in actually up here. The map is the other way. This one here is down here. So you start at Les Chaussées, and then you go back to Tres Le Champ, and then you cross over there's a highway through here. You cross over the highway, and then you basically do this circumnavigation, and you then return to Tête à Vent, which is right here. And then the other route, which everyone else was taking, was sort of a direct route. So it's quite steep climb, and then there's the ladders up to the same location of Tête à Vent. I think Tête à Vent is there. But so that you have to take this much more circumnavigation to get to the same spot, whereas everyone else is basically going direct. But I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I think there was only 2 other people that had taken that route. And so it was really nice and quiet, even though there were sections, like it was constantly steep as you climb it. So you're coming from Les Chaussées, and then you're going to Argentière, and then Tres Le Champ, and then you climb up to the base here, which is this section here, and then you do the climb up to the Col des Monts. But I enjoyed it. To be honest with you, and there was no one around, so I felt safe, not having to see anybody do anything ridiculous, and it was quite an enjoyable section. And I got basically to the same point of the Tête à Vent. You can see the gradients on that section were up to 34%, so it wasn't exactly a tame climb. A couple, steep sections in there as well, tricky sections, problems to overcome, quite a few steps. It wasn't, it was a challenge to get up there. It wasn't simple, but I enjoyed it, and I saw quite a bit. Obviously different than what other people were seeing, but I really enjoyed that climb. It wasn't raining. It was still overcast, and then I got to the Tête à Vent, and I decided to have a rest. There's actually a quite big boulder field before you get to Tête à Vent when you're coming on this Col des Monts. And it's a large boulder field. It's a little bit tricky to navigate. I don't have a picture of it here, but it's a little bit tricky to navigate through it, and it's quite long. It's not a short section. It was, I don't know how many meters. It was maybe 250 meters of a big, large boulder rock field, and it really wasn't well marked. on how to actually get through it, and you had to basically navigate your own way. But I got through no problem, and like I say, I got to the Tête au Vent and I decided to rest. And this was the second incident I had with a social club. It seemed to be the modus operandi of the hike was incidents with social clubs. Again, it wasn't the same social club. It was a different social club. But at the Tête au Vent, you got these spectacular views, and there's lots of single solo hikers and couples and small groups of 3, and they were all kind of like resting at the top. And it was quiet, and everyone was peacefully enjoying the surrounding and catching their breath and having a small bite to eat and a drink and stuff like that. So it was actually quite nice and calm. And then a social club came up. Again, it was probably some group of from a hiking group or a tennis club or bicycle club or who knows. All you could tell is that they were a social group. And again, I think it was about 8 people. And it was kind of like one of those, they probably were a jogging club, because when you have like people who are jogging and the first person across the line stands there, and then they just kind of go bananas when everyone else crosses the line, and everyone then stands and they're all kind of like clapping and cheering as everyone crosses the line like it's some huge massive victory. Well, unfortunately, that's what they were doing. And every time someone climbed to the top of the ladder, these guys were just going nuts, jumping up and down, clapping, whistling, like basically making idiots out of themselves. And this went on for like 8 different hikers coming up these stupid ladders, and everyone's screaming out their names and taking photos and high-fiving. And I mean, it's way over the top. I mean, no one else was doing this. It was just this social club, and it seemed so out of place. Like it was something you would take out of a jogging club who had just done a marathon or something. And it just ruined the moment. And I think a lot of people were kind of enjoying the moment until that happened. And this went on for about 15 or 20 minutes while all these hikers were coming up. Their social group was coming up, and of course then once they all got to the top, they all started basically having a social function at the top. And the whole thing just ruined the moment, really, to be honest with you. It's kind of like when you're in a library and then someone comes in and starts talking loudly in the library. It's kind of like that event, because a lot of times up here it's silent. I mean, there's not a lot of noise when you get in the mountains, other than a few people around you and stuff. But they may be talking or walking, but most people are, when they're hiking, they're not necessarily always talking. But you had this big social club just going absolutely bananas for having traversed or climbed these ladders. So, and like I say, this went on for about 15 minutes. Once they got on the top, they were all still sort of in this celebratory mood and taking photos and high-fiving and hugging, and it was like a parade, and it was just ridiculous, over the top and loud, and it really ruined the moment, unfortunately. So I was glad to know that they were hiking in a different direction. They went to there's a lake nearby. I don't recall the name of it. It's a famous lake. I decided not to go there. They went there, so I was thankful that I didn't go there. And then I basically gathered myself together and started to do the traverse off of the Tête, and it's a very long section here. It seemed to be more challenging than I think what they're showing here. In terms of descent, there's quite a few steps and drops. Maybe the overall incline is low, but there was quite a few steps and drops. It wasn't certainly a continuous path. There was a lot of steps and drops on that section. What you do see as you're walking through there, like once you get to the Tête au Vent and you start walking through this section here, on your left, you start to get these types of panoramic views, which are just stunning. It's absolutely amazing. That's probably I think that's really the premier section of the tour is this section in here for panoramic views. It's spectacular. You can stop and just be mesmerized for hours if you chose to, because it's just so much to see. It's just spectacular ranges of all these aiguillettes. By the way, are I asked one of the guys on the trail what it meant. It's a French guy, and he told me it means needles. So it's like these sharp little. They're not really mountains. They're needles that sit on top of rises in mountains. So if you've ever wondered what an aiguillette is, that's what they are. So I continued along this section, and I got to a Refuge La Flagerie at 1875 meters, and I think I'm saying that wrong. I think it's La Flagère, which is quite far down. And the intention, it actually started to slowly drizzle by this time, and the intention was to actually stop at La Flagère. I wasn't planning on going further. I thought that would be a good stop point, and then, you know, the rest of the hike would come the next day. And like, you know, as the lady said, there was going to be rain in the afternoon, late afternoon, so it was kind of proving out that, yeah, it started to slowly, not rain, but it was definitely drizzling harder. The stranger thing was that, and this is really something I'm going to highlight, and you have to really be aware if you do the tour of this fact, is that from La Chaussée up to that, you know, all through this region, through here and up to the Refuge La Flagère, there were no water fountains available. And I didn't know this. I didn't know there was this water problem on this section, but you couldn't fill your water, and I didn't worry too much because I thought eventually, you know, when you get to the refuge or something, there's going to be water fountains, because there always had been up to this point. And unfortunately, when I got to La Flagère, I did buy a iced tea, which was extremely expensive. I think it was the most expensive. They wanted like €5.50 just for a small can of iced tea. And then I sort of asked them, I said, well, where's the water fountain? Because everyone else had a water fountain. They said, oh, there's no water here. It's non-potable. You have to buy it. And so the only choice you had was to buy bottled water. And of course, again, it was expensive. I don't mind paying the money, but it's simply everyone else had water fountains except at La Flagère. The Refuge La Flagère, they didn't have water fountains. And so I ended up, I was kind of like going to not buy it just on principle, but I said, well, I'll just buy one bottle. And as it turned out, that bottle probably was the most important bottle of water I bought on the entire tour, and you'll understand why soon. There is camping, like you can. There's an aire de bivouac at Refuge La Flagère, just like there is on several of the other ones in France. The difference is on this section of the tour, you have to use your phone and read a barcode and reserve 24 hours ahead to get, you know, to be allowed to legally stay at the aire de bivouac. I mean, it's ridiculous, basically. I think it's a ridiculous thing. I mean, you know, people who are coming through are probably not going to know about this, so how are you going to know to do it 24 hours in advance unless you've done the tour before and it's not advertised? It certainly isn't in the Chicharron book stated, and I don't know where they came up with it, but you don't have the barcode when you're traveling there, so I don't know where they came up with it's a ridiculous rule or law, and so, you know, I wasn't legally allowed to stay at Refuge La Flagère. There's obviously a large hotel there, because this is a tourist, a ski site, a ski resort, basically in the winter. So, you know, you could have booked a room there, and then obviously you can stay in the refuge as well if you're pre-booked. But so you got an expensive hotel like resort, then you've got the refuge, and then you got the aire de bivouac. But again, you were supposed to be pre-booking this 24 hours in advance, the aire de bivouac, which I think is a ridiculous. Again, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make much sense, especially none of the other campsites or aire de bivouac had such an arrangement. But lots of strange things happened on this sector of the tour, unfortunately, and that was one of them. By now it was getting a little bit later at night, maybe around 3 or 4 o'clock, and the skies were getting grayer, and it was, you know, the drizzle was starting to pick up a bit, and I had a choice. You know, I was either going to continue or, you know, try and make the best of it and, you know, find a place to camp or something, and at the end of the day I decided I was going to carry on, which is usually what I did. If you recall, at Refuge La Motte and Refugio Elisabetta, I wasn't allowed to pitch my tent there either. So I just said, okay, I'm going to just continue hiking, and that's what I did. Even though in this case the storm, or not the storm, but the clouds were getting darker, and it was starting to rain more. And everyone who had been on the tour up to that point, because there was probably there's not a real Congo line, but there's definitely a lot of hikers. No one was going past Refuge La Flagère that when I was. I mean, everyone had stopped either at the La Flagère Refuge, or there is a cable car that goes down, and a lot of people were basically exiting the tour, I think, at La Flagère, and then going to Chamonix, and then basically, walking into Les Houches and quote unquote completing their tour. So it didn't seem that many hikers were passing. There was only 3 people I saw after I left La Flagère. It was 3 younger people, I think, and they were having lunch or dinner, some bread and some jam and sort of thing on the side as I passed them. But that's the only people that actually had continued that day hiking past La Flagère. So you then carry on until you get to Plan Pras, which is at 2,000 meters. So we're coming into this region in here, which is down in this sector in here. And then I got to Plan Pras, which is another resort center, not as big as La Flagère, but it's Plan Pras is another resort with a cable car. It did have some stores, like you could get like I said, I bought that bottle of water here. It was only like a 250 milliliter bottle. I still had probably about a liter of extra water on my body, like with the platypus water system, and then I probably had like a quarter of water left in my water bottle. So all told, I probably had about I don't know, I maybe had like less than 2 liters of water, probably 1.5 liters of water by the time I left La Flagère. And then when I got to Plan Pras, I thought I was going to either buy another bottle of water, or hopefully they had a like everywhere else, they had a public fountain, and you could fill your bottles with glacier water, or worse than that, at least they'd have a store open that I could buy something more to drink, because by now I was starting, I was getting lower in my water, probably around, by the time I got there, it was probably only around 500 milliliters of water left, because you have to drink quite a bit when you're hiking. When we got there were other hikers there who were coming in the other direction. They were going clockwise, so they were coming from where I was going to head. And again, it was a situation where the stores were closed. There was nowhere to get water. So you can imagine from La Chaux-Soleil in the morning till somewhere around here, which is, that's probably like 18 kilometers of hiking throughout the day. And, I had basically access to 250 milliliter bottle of water, and not knowing that, there was this problem, because it didn't exist anywhere else on the tour. It's just this section here, there's absolutely no water other than those 2 spots, like I say, in purchasing the expensive water here, but there's no public taps available. And then again, at Plan Pras, the store was closed, and there was no water fountain. And so now I was getting quite nervous, because, I only had like 500 milliliters of water left, and I still couldn't see where to stop, or whether to continue. It was getting now around 6:30 at night. And so again, the decision was not to stop at Plan Pras. There was also some more mist and clouds rolling in, and so I decided, rightly or wrongly, to continue to Col de Brevant. From Plan Pras to Col de Brevant, you start to do this incline ascent here, and this is where the mountain mists, right about here. This part on the profile, where I had that little adventure with the mountain mist and getting caught out on the ledge as the mountain mist rolled up quite rapidly and enveloped me, and sort of made it difficult to navigate. That's where that occurred when I was heading on my way to Col de Brevant, which is at 2368 meters. And so that was my little adventure, overcoming that. And then when I got to Col de Brevant, I hadn't had a chance to read my Cicerone guidebook because I didn't expect to go this far on the day. And I thought that was the high point, and that was the last high point for the tour. So I thought, okay, at least I've completed all the cols. I simply have to do the descent now into Les Houches. And at that stage, I probably thought I was going to stop there's another refuge called Belachat. And I think the intention was to get to Belachat late at night and then basically pitch my tent and then leave the next day. I hadn't intended to go to Les Houches that night when I was at Col de Brevant. I was met by two hikers who were doing a clockwise rotation, but not of the tour. They had their own little, they were native to the area, and they had come out for like a 3-day hike. And so I met them at the top of the Col de Brevant. And we had a little bit of a chat, and so they asked me where I'm going. I asked them where they're going, and they said, "Oh, so you have to go to Le Brevant." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And they said, "Well, they pointed to the right, and they said you got to climb up there. That's where the summit is." And I said, "Oh, I thought we just like dropped down from here to no, you got to go up to Le Brevant. It's another almost 2,000 meters of hiking." And it was getting quite late at this time. It was probably, like I say, at this time it was probably like 7:30 at night. And so they basically left and were going in the direction that I had just come from, back towards Plainpras. And now I had to go from the Col de Brevant at 2368 and climb to this peak at 25 meters. The problem there was that it was no longer a dirt trail. It was literally climbing up sides of graded mountainside. So over loose shale and stuff like that, and it wasn't well marked. It was marked, but not well marked, and obviously not. It was getting darker, and not knowing where to go exactly, because it's the first time I've ever been there, and no one else was around, so it's not like you could follow other people. I mean, those guys happened to be going through, and I think they were the first people I'd met, probably in an hour and a half since I came off of the ledge and met that trail runner. They were the first people I'd met since then. So the trail was really sparsely populated at that time. So as happens, I was getting ready to hike towards Le Brevant, and not really too thrilled about it, because I thought I'd already hit the high point, and now I had to go another 2,000 meters higher, which was, it's not insignificant. It's quite a hike to go up that 2,000 meters up to Le Brevant. So as happens, I was about to go, and then in the counterclockwise direction, 3 hikers came towards me, which seemed strange because those are the same 3 hikers I passed when I left La Flagère. And I started to talk to them, and they said, oh, they took the wrong, they thought like going off the, they had the same idea I had. They thought that the Col de Brevant was the high point, and now they had to descend. So they basically went over the edge and started descending for about an hour until they realized they'd made a mistake. Because if you go off that edge, it takes you in a completely different direction. You'll never get back to Les Houches, or even this Refuge de Belachat was where they wanted to go. So they said, oh, we've got to go to Le Brevant. I said, well, that's where I'm going as well. So we all basically got together and started climbing, although I didn't, when you're a solo hiker, you can't really impose yourself on other hikers and say, wait for me, or, I don't know where I'm going, help me. It's you basically, they take off, and, if you keep up, you keep up. If you don't, you don't. And, you have to hike at your own pace. They were stronger hikers than I was. And, shortly I lost them. They took off. They were quite far ahead of me. And within 15 minutes, I couldn't really see them up the trail anymore. But at least it got me started on the direction to Les Brevant. And so I started hiking through it, and it was marked better than some of the other sections, because there really was no, it was really just rock and loose rock, like sort of this type of stuff that you're seeing here. So there was really no defined trail, but there was some markers, more of these painted markers to help guide you through. So I wasn't struggling too much with the navigation. And then about 15-20 minutes later, I saw these 3 hikers, and they were standing, and I thought, well, that's kind of strange. I wonder why they stopped. But there was some, what do they call those animals? The like billy goats, and the one girl, she was a real nut lover, or animal lover, an animal lover, and she was taking all these photos of these family of mountain goats, billy goats. And so they'd been standing there for about 10 or 15 minutes taking photos, and I sort of came back up to them, and then they started to hike again. So I was sort of, I followed again, like in the first time. I was behind them for a while, and then I lost sight of them again. So then, it's really quite challenging to get up to Les Bravants. It's not well marked. So we ended up, there was more mountain goats, and they stopped again, and I basically, thankfully there was more mountain goats, and I basically caught up to them again. And then there is a section where you have to, like as in before, where TdMB, you have to do this climbing these ladders, and you can see the section here. So what you do is you come up, and you basically, there's these like rods, as you can see, that are basically bolted to the as a handle guide, and then you start to climb the ladders here, and then you transfer over to another ladder, and then you transfer to another ladder, and that's how you get up these, other than having to do a free climb. So that was about 8 o'clock at night. We all went up and got to the top, and then you climb further, and you get to the peak of Les Bravants at 25 meters. There is another cable car. Obviously, they're not running, but there was another cable car at the peak that would take you down to Chamonix or near Chamonix. I don't know exactly but it's on the Chamonix side, so it'd probably get you close to Chamonix. Again, these are all ski resorts, so people who are wanting to do skiing come up to these in the winter. But so it was 25 meters at the peak, and that was the last high point for me on the trail. Everything after that was this long, grueling, unending descent back to Les Houches. Even the attention still at Les Bravants was to probably stop at the Refuge de Bellechat, because it was probably about maybe a third of the way or half of the way down, and this is a really long descent. It takes a long time. It was already, I think by the time we reached here, it was about 8:30 at night. The sun had gone down. It was dusk, and the light was starting to fade. So basically we parted at the summit. They wanted to get to the Bellechat Refuge quickly, and I simply couldn't keep up. They were better hikers than me, and I couldn't keep up with them. So I told them, go ahead, just leave me, and I'll get there by myself. So they went down, and I didn't see them again after that. And so I made my way it was around 8:30 at night, and then I made my way. And I never really found Bellechat Refuge. I found 3 or 4 tents in one part of a section on the way down, but it wasn't a refuge, so I never actually saw Refuge Bellechat. I'm not sure if I just overlooked it or I was on the wrong part of the trail, but I never actually found the refuge. The weather was more drizzly rain, and I had in the back of my mind what the women at the Les Chaux-Soleil had told me, that it was going to rain heavily the next 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday, and that basically drove the decision for me to not stop and try to make Les Houches on the same day. And the reason I did that is because this is some steep sections on the drop, and if it's wet and raining, it's much more treacherous, and you can get injured. And then if I don't do that, I'm basically going to be stuck in a tent for 2 days, and having to wait for the storms and the rain to complete. 2 days in a tent without water, not a lot of food reserves. it was getting pretty grim and bleak. There's not a lot of services on this section. It's something you have to really keep in mind. It's the most spectacular views, but they're very weak in terms of services for water and food and drink. Again, from here to here, there was really no water, no tap water at all. Every time I came to a tap, it said non-potable, and that only happened about 2 or 3 times. So the only place you could really get anything to drink at all was at the Refuge La Flagère, and if I had known there was no other water, I would have stocked up there. So like I say, I'm really glad I picked a bottle of water, because if I didn't, I would have been, I would have ran out of water probably somewhere around here. By the time I was doing the descent, I had literally like 250 milliliters of water left, and all I was doing was putting a little bit of water in my mouth and literally swishing it around in my mouth and not swallowing it, and trying to hold it in my mouth as long as possible just to keep my mouth wet. And I did that a couple times, and by that time I was absolutely thirsty, and I couldn't eat because basically if you're going to eat, you have to have some liquid in your system. Otherwise, I didn't have, I had trail mix and that, so I needed water to wash it down and sort of make it palatable for my gastronomical tract. And without it, I didn't really feel like eating without water. So I basically did this mostly without any food and water up to that point. So I got into that section, like I said, where the 4 tents were. I don't know who was. I suspect it may have been these 3 people and someone else who were sleeping in those tents, but they had all been, they were sleeping by this time, because it was around 9:30. The sun had almost gone completely down. There was just some last traces of light. And it was basically at a stage where I had to then turn on my headlamp, and thankfully I had one with me, and it was at least strong enough to light some of the tour. But I had to do the rest of this with the headlamp, and it got quite. There's 2 things that happen when the sun goes down. The temperature plummets 10-15 degrees at least, maybe more, and then it goes from sort of a dusky to a quite black darkness. There was no sun or no moon that night because there was a lot of cloud in the sky. That's another thing. Unfortunately, at Les Bravants, there was a lot of cloud coverage, so I did see a little bit of panorama, because it's another spectacular point to see views, but I didn't see too much because it was too overcast to see. There was a lot of mist as I mentioned before, there was mist coming up, so there was a lot of mist and overcast, and I didn't get to see any spectacular views. Like you're going to see, you can see stuff like this, but it was quite overcast, so I didn't get to see as good a panorama as I could have expected. But that's simply the cost. You can't always control what the weather is going to be, and it is what it is when you're there. And then you can't stay there for half a day and wait for the weather to improve. You get to see what you get to see, and I'd been blessed to see so much on the tour. I was obviously disappointed, but I had seen so much. I had to believe I would say out of the entire tour, I saw probably 85 to 90% of what could have been seen. So I think, a lot of people, they may get down to 50 or 40%. So I think I did really well, and I was thankful to see what I didn't get to see everything, but I saw most of it. Let's put it that way. So getting back to here, I had now put on my headlamp, again, still without water, without food, and having to do the descent. The descent, I decided not to clamp, as I said, for the reasons I mentioned with the weather, and then simply there wasn't that really many that great spots to camp other than that one section, but it was quite full with 4 tents because it wasn't very big, and it's on, as you can see, it's on quite a big decline here. So I continued hiking from Les Bravants into Les Houches, and it's you're basically dropping 1,500 meters over that distance there, which is about I think that's about 25 to I can't read the numbers, unfortunately, but it's definitely got to be about 8 to 10 kilometers this distance. And and you can see how precipitous that drop. Anything in red is going to be, look, up to 31% gradient on the drop. So I continued to hike in the night, and it got really dark. And all I had for illumination at eventually was simply the headlamp. And the headlamp was good for tents, but not necessarily for night hiking. If I knew I was going to do night hiking, I probably would have had a better quality. It was a black diamond headlamp, and it's got a good reputation, but I don't think it's really meant for night hiking. And if I knew I was going to night hike, I probably would have had one with a stronger lumen, maybe the same make, like a black diamond, but one with a higher lumen count to see more of the trail, because I simply couldn't see that much. My visibility was down to probably, again, 1 meter, but that was only like a 1 meter. Instead of the mist, at least I had 360 one meter, but with a headlamp, it's only what you're pointing your lamp at. And you can't obviously always be looking at your feet, so you're kind of looking a little bit ahead of you, and then the light gets dim pretty quickly. You start missing all the tour markers as you're descending, and you have to be much more careful because if you slip or fall, you don't really know where you're slipping or falling to. So I continued with night hiking. And there's two sections. You can see it here. So as you're coming down this section in here, which is this section in here, it's quite steep. And then there's two. What happens is you have these runoffs from the glaciers, and they basically make these like waterfall river type scenarios. This one here is called Torrent de la Paz. And there's another one, so there's two of them. This is the trail here, so if you're coming down from the Les Brevants, you're going to pass the first one, which is Ravine de Vouliard, and then the second one you come down, here, it's the Torrent de la Paz. And this is a picture of it, and it's not exactly like this. It depends on where it might be like this, but that picture is not where I was. I mean, it's somewhere along there, but I'm just showing you kind of what they are. And at some point, you have to basically cross over it. What happens is usually when you're coming up to these waterfall situations so you're descending, you're constantly descending. So you're confident that you're on the right path. Of course, in the dark, I don't know where I'm going. I can't see any markers, and it's this long descent that kind of goes along the side of the mountain. One of the things I think is the problem here is that from Les Brevants, it doesn't really it doesn't go straight down the mountain. It literally stays in the side of the mountain face for a long distance, and then it slowly works its way downward. So you're almost like following a ridge line. It's not a ridge line, but you don't really, this is a long distance, but you haven't really dropped that much in terms of descent, even though it's quite steep. You haven't really, you're still, even here, you're still quite a ways down to the valley in Chamonix. From here to here, it's still quite deep. So what happened is that you're constantly sort of, you feel like you're declining, you're descending, but you don't feel like you're getting down, if that makes sense. Like you're descending, but you're not really getting to the, to the location you want to go. It seems like you're always just walking, instead of going straight down, you're basically walking aside and slowly going down, even though it's not slow, it's a quite steep descent. But you're having to traverse a lot of lateral ground to make any sort of vertical descent. Even though you are descending, you simply have to travel quite a long distance. So as you're doing that, and so this line here is basically, that yellow line is basically the line, I'm coming from Balachat and going in this direction, and there's these waterfalls, there's two of them somewhere in this area. I don't know exactly, I can't show exactly on here, but they're basically in this location. So I zoomed in with Google Maps, and I located, this one here is actually Torrent de la Paz. The other one, the Ravine de la Villard is back up here a bit. They're similar. The Ravine de Villard wasn't too bad. The other thing that happens when you hit these is that, you'll be descending and then suddenly you start ascending again. which is really nerve-wracking, because you should be descending and then suddenly you start climbing, and it's not just it's not just like 10 meters. You're climbing like 150, 250, 300, 400 meters, and it's like you're supposed to be going down, and yet you're going up, and that's never a great sign. If you recall, when I got lost, I knew I was supposed to be ascending, but I was descending, and that's kind of was a red flag that I was on the wrong trail. And of course, not knowing what the trail is, and it being in the dark, and not knowing for sure if I was on the right trail, I simply was following the trail I was on. And the fact that it started to rise again, I knew there's lots of crisscrossing and variance on this face, and I thought I was getting a bit panicked, because I thought if I'm on the wrong variant, I could be out here for all night and basically wandering and getting lost. So I was quite nervous when I started to ascend, and then to top it off, I started hearing water running, and of course I didn't know these torrents, these waterfalls were on this path. I'd never been there, so I didn't know there were waterfalls, but I started to hear quite loud water rushing down, and so of course I thought, well, it's a waterfall somewhere, but you can't see it. It's at night, and so as I'm approaching it, the waterfalls are getting stronger and louder, and so the rocks around are getting slipperier, and you can only see about a meter ahead of you, and you're approaching these, and you've got to cross it, but you don't know exactly where you're crossing or what you're crossing to. So all you can see at best is you get to the edge where the water is. There's a few boulders with the rushing water coming by, and then there's you're picking up the edge on the other side somewhere. You don't know where it goes, you can't see, so you kind of blindly walk across the water, and then sort of continue best you can, and then hopefully you get past it and you're back on the quote unquote the trail, the dry trail. So I got past the first one relatively unscathed. It wasn't really it wasn't a great experience, but I was thankful I got past it without too many problems. And again, not knowing for sure if I was on the right path at this stage, I kept going. The other thing that happens, which I should mention, when you're coming down here, you can see the lights of Chamonix quite well at night. I think Chamonix is here, so it gives you the illusion that you're getting, as you're coming down, it gives you this illusion that you're getting closer to the lights, and you feel like I'm in the right direction. I've got Chamonix on my left-hand side. I'm getting closer to Chamonix. The lights are starting to get brighter, so you're kind of feeling good about things, because at least you've got Chamonix on your left, and that's where it should be. So even if you're on the wrong trail, at least you're getting closer to Chamonix, and you kind of think, well, eventually I'll get down near there, and I'll then have to simply go to Les Houches, which is it's a half-hour bus ride away, so it's down here further. But not knowing for sure that that's Chamonix, you think it is, but you don't know for sure, because I don't know what Chamonix looks like at night from Les Brevants. It's the first time I've seen it. I assumed it was Chamonix. So you've got this set of lights down here, some city, which gives you a bit of comfort, because civilization is close, and you're on the right side of the mountain face, and if you can continue heading towards those lights, good things should happen. Once I got past this second torrent, so I'm coming, that's the Refuge des Belles-Chattes. The Ravine des Villards is somewhere in here. It's possibly in here. I don't know exactly. I didn't locate it, but this is the Torrent de la Path, for certain. And it's got a strange, like the other one was kind of like you came down, you got to the water edge, you crossed over, you went through a bit of an embankment, and then you simply carried on. So, there was some comfort that it was relatively straightforward in terms of other waterfalls you'd crossed on the trail. So there was, even though it was dark, you couldn't see, you at least had some comfort that it was quote unquote normal, and there was nothing that was, too out of the ordinary. And I wasn't, even though I wasn't, feeling great about it, I simply, it was what you would expect. Let's put it that way. Because I had crossed several of these before on the trail, so it was similar to what I've done in the past. Now when I got to the Torrent de la Paix, things changed quite quickly. Again, so after the first Villard, you start descending again, which gives you comfort. But then, maybe about 45 minutes later, another ascent starts coming. And again, you're getting nervous because suddenly you're, instead of descending and getting closer to those lights, you're starting to ascend again. And it's quite a steep ascent. And it was really nerve-wracking because I don't mind if it's, 20 meters and then, you go up over something and you come back down and you keep dropping, because dropping is good when you're descending. But ascending is not. And again, it was a similar type of event as the previous waterfall, where you're ascending like 200-300 meters higher, or maybe even 250 or 300. It was going on for quite a while that I was getting higher and higher. And I said to myself, that's a bad sign. That means something's coming up. And sure enough, again, I started to hear water, rushing water, but it was a bit louder this time. And so I'm following it in. And of course, it's different. It's not like the other one was, where it was relatively, even though it was dark, it was relatively, standard waterfall, crossover and simply go. This one started to come up to this edge, and then there was a sharp rock face. I'm using this. It wasn't this. I'm just using this as sort of an example. But rather than having a straight cross, there was like a rock face. And of course you have all this rushing water. It's dark at night. You can't see where you're going. And then suddenly the trail just vanishes. It goes onto a sort of I would say it was probably about maybe a 50-degree slanted rock. And there is some of these bars that are drilled into the rock face. So you're supposed to hang on to these bars and then sort of walk on this slanted rock and cross this section. And of course, all I know is grab the bar and then head into the dark, because you can't really see that far ahead. And of course, you've got all this rushing water on your right hand side. Your left hand is holding this bar, and there's a quite steep rock face that you're trying to traverse on the side as you're doing this, and not seeing any more than a meter ahead of you where it goes. You just sort of, it's a bit unsettling, let's put it that way. Not having experienced it before, it's a bit unsettling. So you're walking out on this wet, slippery rock ledge with your left hand on this bar. You've got all this rushing water on your right hand side, and you've got this black void in front of you. And right away, it's not like it was before, where you just simply traverse the waterfall and keep going. Suddenly you're walking parallel to the waterfall on this slow slant rock, and I don't know what's coming up next. So I'm getting out there, and again, this is about maybe for 10 meters you're walking like this, and then suddenly the bar stops, and then there's a chain, but it continues with this slighted thing, but it's now a chain instead of a bar. So you transfer your left hand without slipping or falling onto this chain, and you're basically now hanging onto this chain and sort of traversing this ledge. And then I think it comes to another bar with a bit of a rise. You have to ascend, and you go around some feature or function, and then you come down, and then you do the normal routine crossing the at a low point or a narrow point in the river or the waterfall, and then you pick up on the other side and you carry on as it's showing here. So I'm sure in the daytime this is, you look at it and it'll probably not be very unsettling, but at night it was not, it was completely different from any other waterfall I had been on. And then, like I said, all this was all unorthodox, with all these chains and bars having to traverse this in line with the water, and then having to cross over. It was a bit of an unsettling experience, to say the least, and not knowing for sure if you're on the right path or where you're going, or maybe you're going to fall off the edge of the mountain here. I didn't know where it was going. I couldn't see, and it's pitch black with this small headlamp, and you're just sort of feeling your way through. So it was a little bit unsettling, but thankfully I got through it, and without any injury. So you simply carry on, and you keep going further. Right now it's probably around 11 o'clock at night. I think when I'm passing through here, and then I carried on. And there's some very steep sections on this descent, as you can see here. What was it, up to 31 degrees? Yeah, there's some very steep sections through here. You come away from the rock line, and then you get into the tree line. So there's the rock line, is where the rocks are only, and then you start to get the tree line, and now you're basically in forest as you're descending. So you're now introducing things like big rocks and boulders on the path. It is a dirt path, and it's on ledges with relatively steep drops. On your left-hand side, you've got lots of tree roots, lots of things to stumble and trip on, and then you've got some steep drops in terms of steps that you have to navigate. It seems every so often you have to navigate one of these boulders or steps or something that's it's a little bit of a problem to solve as you're hiking. You have to be careful of not falling and all the rest of it. And if you do fall, like I say, the ledge drop here is quite steep. You're probably going to fall into like rocks and trees. But of course I couldn't really see. I just knew it was steep, and I knew on my left-hand side was a steep decline, and on my right-hand side was rock face with like tree roots and boulders all on the path. So it was a bit tricky hiking through there. And as I was going down, so I'd passed this section here, and as I was going through here, there was a section where the trail kind of made like a dog leg. And at the top of the dog leg, there was a rock mound and some sharp pointed rock face. I'm just trying to see if I can have a picture of what type of. It's kind of like this jaggedy. It's not like this, but I mean it's jaggedy rock, sort of. It's this type of rocks. And there was a step, and it was a dog leg step. So you had to basically go up to the leg. You went up to the leg, then you dropped, and then the trail continued. Maybe that's like, is that a dog leg? You basically come down, there's this ledge with these sharp rocks that you drop down to the trail again. That's probably about at least a 1 meter drop with all kinds of rock. It's not like a smooth path. And I had been hiking probably since 8:30 in the morning, and now it's getting up to 11:30 at night, without water and without food for most of the day. I still didn't actually, to be honest with you, I didn't feel that bad. I wasn't like exhausted or delirious or anything, but I was obviously tired, and more than the physical, as I've mentioned before, more than the physical demands, hiking like this is the mental demand. Like the concentration level has to be peaked, and I was literally yelling at myself maybe once every half hour to stay sharp, stay focused. Maybe your legs are sore, but if you fall, you're going to be a lot more sore. So, keep sharp. Don't fall asleep. Don't get, sort of like too comfortable or too, sort of not focusing. You got to stay sharp. You got to stay sharp. I kept screaming that to myself literally as I was hiking down here. Not screaming, but definitely saying it out loud. So I was conscious to basically keep concentrating. And again, if you lose your concentration on these hikes when you're descending, that's when you get into trouble. So I was constantly reminding myself to, even if my legs were sore, I said to myself, make sure you concentrate and don't start to sort of take things for granted. Unfortunately, on this ledge, I don't know exactly what happened. I think my right trekking pole got jammed into the rock, and so as I was coming down and basically making the drop onto the carry, like I'm coming down, I placed my hiking poles, then I made the drop to carry on the trail, and I think my right pole got stuck into the rock. It basically wedged itself in the rock. So as I went to go like drop onto the lower section, the hiking pole jammed into the rock. And so what it did is it excuse me one second. What it did is it twisted me around, and I basically, my right foot slipped out, or my left foot slipped out, I think. It happened so fast I didn't really have time to analyze exactly what happened. And it wasn't a standard, like your foot slips out and you fall on your behind. It's more, this was like a strange, it was a strange motion. The other thing is, instead of falling backwards, I actually fell forward, which is, you're falling into something like it's dark. You can't see anything. So you're falling into something that you don't know. You don't exactly know where the trail is. You can see there's a ledge there and you can see the trail that you're dropping down to, but you don't know what's ahead of it. So literally I fell face forward, which was quite disconcerting, not knowing where you're falling. But obviously when it's happening, you don't have time to think. It's not a good idea. And then I landed quite heavily on my chest. And there was some rocks with some almost like pointing up with a quite sharp ridge that punctured into my chest. It didn't break the skin, but it was, there was definitely bruises and some blood like underneath. It didn't actually break the skin, thankfully, but it did. I got 6 puncture marks on my chest. And then what was worse, the right pole stuck in the rock, so it got bent, and then it came out as I fell. Like I said, I landed on my chest, and then I hit the trail face first, and then I must have been on the off the edge of the trail, because my backpack fell off my back and started to ride up over my head. So gravity was carrying it off my back over my head. And so it stopped because I had my, it's basically, you have it under your underarms. The loops are under your underarms. So that stopped it from falling off my head down the mountain. And I guess basically I was sort of like at the torso sort of off the edge. Of course, I couldn't see anything. I'm just, because of the way I landed, I'm suspecting this is what happened. So basically my hips and my legs were on the trail, and the upper part of my body was starting to fall off the edge. It wasn't a steep descent there where I fell on my face. It was more of probably about 20 degrees from horizontal. So it wasn't like I was off the edge and it was like this 90-degree drop. It was like about a 20-degree angle. So my front torso fell on that 20 degrees face first, and then my backpack basically slid off my back over my head and pinned me. I was literally pinned. I had a 12-kilogram backpack on my head pinning me to the ground. And worse was that the way my arms fell, it was kind of like you cross them in front of your body. So I had all my weight on my arms, and I still had the poles in my hands crossed over, and everything was pinned. And I tried to lift my arms up, but everything was pinned. I was literally pinned by the weight of my rucksack against the mountain, face first. And to compound it, my light was, basically it fell off my head, and it was near me. It didn't fall down the mountain, but it was near me, but it was obviously not illuminating and everything, so everything went suddenly black too. So I like, your natural instinct is to pop back up and stand up, but of course I couldn't do it because I had all the weight of my backpack on my head and my arms were pinned. So I had to slowly release. First thing I had to do was release my hands from the trekking poles, but of course you have wrist loops from the trekking poles around your wrist to hold them from falling off. So I had to wiggle my hands out of the loops on the trekking poles and sort of push them away so they didn't, because they were holding me down as well. I couldn't lift my arms because they were literally pinned against the ground. And then I had to slide my hands underneath my body and away from the load of the knapsack on top of me. And then I had to put my hands above my head and literally push my rucksack back towards my hips to get it off my head. And by this, I had a big chunk of like dirt and mud all over the left side of my face where my face had landed. And so I slowly orientated myself, got the load off my back, and I took my backpack off and slid it off onto the trail, and then slowly recovered and got back on my feet. The the trekking pole, unfortunately, the lower section, because I think there's 3 sections on the trekking pole, the lower section had a very big curved bend in it where it stuck and got pulled out. So I literally bent the trekking pole. It would no longer collapse. The last section was bent too badly, and thankfully I didn't lose them, and they were still, for the most part, usable. And then so I basically dusted myself off and carried on. So that was a bit of an adventure that I probably could have done without. But these things happen, and you simply have to carry on. Obviously, the dehydration, the lack of food, and then the long hike didn't help to try to avoid this. And then night hiking, and then this problem in the trail where it was this unusual dogleg drop. Just compounded everything, and then it just came to a scenario where I happened to fall. Thankfully, I didn't get that injured. I had some bumps and bruises. Obviously, there was the one on my chest, and I think I landed on my right palm near the thumb. Took quite a blow on one of the rocks as well. So I had a really big bruise and sore on the pad of my thumb, right thumb. And I think maybe there's a couple scrapes and bumps on my legs, but nothing serious, to be honest. I survived, and you simply pick yourself up and you carry on. But of course, in these situations, it wakes you up, and you're more alert, and you're trying to be careful. And then inevitably, what happens about 15 or 20 minutes later, there was another similar. It was quite similar. This problem, as I'm descending, was a similar type of rock formation. This sort of, you come to the ledge, and then there's a drop, and then it picks up the trail again. And it was actually really similar. It was almost a copycat in some ways, I think, of the original one. And of course, I saw it coming up, and I said, I'm literally talking to myself out loud, because I'm trying to make sure I'm, not being, sort of reckless, and make sure and I'm cautious, and literally telling myself, okay, here's another drop, be careful, make sure you're taking the cautions and all the rest. But I mean, there's no perfect way to take these drops. You literally have to come to a point where you're kind of dropping, like you're kind of jumping. You're not in control. Whereas if it's a step, your feet are always on the ground. In this case, you're having to actually drop. And there's no other way to get down. I mean, it's like a meter drop. So you simply have to kind of jump. And unfortunately, I think this time my right foot slipped. I guess there was water, and there's dew on the trail, or some moisture, and my right foot slipped at the top, and I landed heavily on my right elbow. I didn't break it, thankfully, but I definitely hit some rocks really hard with my right elbow. That's where all the main impact was. And my tent poles went flying. This time they were released, and they kind of went, as I was falling, I let them go, and they literally went somewhere. And I hit my elbow really hard, and I think I scraped I think it was my right knee. I scraped pretty badly as well. And again, the rocks are quite sharp, and not very forgiving on flesh hitting them. And I knew right away that my elbow wasn't broken, and even though it was very sore, I knew it wasn't broken. And to be honest with you, I actually said out loud, well, that's not going to faze me too much. And because it wasn't broken, I thought, it's obviously there's going to be a really bad bruise, and there's probably some cut skin and bleeding, which there was, but it wasn't broken, and that was really all I cared about. So I had to find my poles, because they kind of went flying in space, and I think one of them was up. I had to do a little bit of an ascent to get it, and the other one had fallen near where I was, but the right one had fallen up the trail, so I had to kind of actually go and hunt it down. I had to find it and then hunt it down and then bring it back. So I regrouped again and carried on, coming down, and I started to hit some signs on the path for the first time, and this is probably getting near around midnight, and I started to hit some park trail pass markers, not the painted kind, the actual road markers telling you directions, where you are and where you're going. Unfortunately, the names that were on the road marker had nothing to do with anything that I was looking for in terms of navigation. They were, saying to go different places that weren't in the Chicharron book. So I was a bit nervous that I thought at this time I'm probably quite lost and don't really know where I am on the descent. When I looked to my left, all the Chamonix lights had gone. Actually, since the that's the other thing. When I was descending, and I started to talk about this, but I didn't complete it. But as I was descending, when I started to hit these waterfalls, I lost all the Chamonix light had gone out. So there was no city glare at all. Not that it helped, but once I got to this section of the trail, there was no lights like in the valley. So everything was absolutely pitch black. I couldn't see any street lamps or any housing lights or anything or roads, or at least I could see that back here, and it was a bit comforting to know that I was slowly getting closer to those lights. But shortly thereafter, in this section here, the Chamonix lights, and I assume they were Chamonix lights, they had all gone out, and I couldn't see anything when I looked down in the valley. Everything was black. Everything in front of me was black. The entire trail was black, and that's where I crossed those two waterfalls in that situation where it was completely dark. And then as I climbed down further, it was still completely pitch black. And then I got to this park called Merlet, and I didn't know where Merlet was, but apparently it's like a nature parking spot where you can drive in from Les Houches and you park in this region, and then you drop your car off, and then you go on hikes, and probably the hikes. I think you go from there, you go to Les Bravants for a day hike. And it seems to be quite popular because there's actually 4 separate parking locations. Like there's 4 separate lots in that region. I didn't know any of this. As I was coming down, I started to hit this, and the first thing I saw was a water fountain, and I thought, oh, thankfully, I'm going to finally get something to drink. And of course, I went up to it, and what does it say? Non-potable water. So, that hope was dashed of actually finally getting something to drink. And I then started to, I believe this is still part of the original Tour du Mont Blanc. I later found out it seems to be the actual, I was on the right trail. There's probably a lot of crisscross variants, as you can see some of this stuff in here. I'm sure there's lots of variants, but I think for the most part I was on the actual tour on the way down here into Merlet. When you get into Merlet, there is a section where you cross through it, and then you drop into, I'll just see if I can find it. I don't have a good map of it. You can, actually it's here. So as you're coming down, you're crossing over those 2 waterfalls, and then you get into Merlet, which is here. They call it Merlet, and it's this Park Merlet, I think it's called. And then you can park your car and you can go and do day hikes if you want. That's the reasoning behind it, I think. There is the trail itself does follow a bit more of a steep decline here, and then eventually gets into Les Houches, which is down here. But having had those 2 experiences up in this region here, I decided to forego being faithful to the tour, and I stayed with the tarmac roads coming down all the way and followed that route to Les Houches. I stopped going on the tour there because it's quite steep, and I'd already had 2 falls, and it was by now it was around, I think here it was around 12:30 at night. I had been hiking for almost what's that going to be? That's 16 hours straight without water and food, and not too much rest. And I thought I didn't want to risk another fall. I know coming through here is going to be quite steep, and I decided to stay on the road because it was the safer option. And so that's what I did. Unfortunately, the road is very convoluted, and it's got a lot of. It's not like a hiking trail you can drop quite precipitously. Roads have a fixed gradient. So what they have to do is they have to start doing, and that's why you see all these, here you only see a few marker dashes, but here you see a lot of them because the road is literally switching back and forth numerous times. And unfortunately, I had to walk through all those switchbacks. Not, of course, again, not knowing exactly where I was, other than I started to see lights again, and I believe that was Leuche. So the good thing, I started to see traffic lights, and not traffic, but like street lamps and stuff like that, and house lights. So that was comforting. By the time I got to here, I could start to see that. So it was a bit disconcerting again because I'm walking through here, and I'm never getting closer to the lights. Just like when I was walking through here, I never seem to be getting closer to the lights. I'm descending, but I'm never getting closer, which is it's psychologically it's a bit defeating because you know you're going down. You keep walking, but you never actually get to the light. You just see it, and you just like exactly what you're looking here. You're just following it, and the same thing here. The lights were here, and I seem to be going lower, but I'm always kind of in parallel with them instead of actually going to them. And so I got out of the park on the tarmac, again without any water source. And then it starts doing all these crazy switchbacks, so many switchbacks. I'm still following it down. And then finally I got down to this section here, and there's a large bridge there's a river that's going through here, as you can see. And there's a bridge there, and I ended up stopping there for about 15 or 20 minutes. Had the last bit of water, which wasn't much. It was about a mouthful of water. I didn't want to drink all my water up here because, not having any water makes you thirstier, if that makes sense. So I kept a mouthful of water, and I rested up. This is the first time I had sat down since Le Breton. I didn't sit because as soon as you sit with a night light, you attract all these moths and they start flying into your face. So you couldn't really stop. You had to keep going. There wasn't mosquitoes, but there were a lot of moths, and they were white moths, and they kept flying into my face because that's where the headlamp is. As soon as you stopped, they started flying into your face. So I couldn't really stop on all this descent other than when I fell. But so I rested on the bridge. It was about 1:15 when I got there in the morning. And then I had to find my way back to the arch. And I took a wrong turn. I had to come back, and I finally used my Google Maps and found the right direction. Because it's, before I came through a different route to take the tour. The tour goes this way when you start it. So I'm coming on the back side of it, back to Leuche. So this is all new for me. And then I made my way back to the arch, and I hit the arch around 1:35 in the evening or the morning. And within like 2 minutes, a car pulled up. Just as I passed under the arch, a car pulled up, and I thought, well, that's strange because it's almost like Leuche is a small town. Everybody's been in bed. Everyone's in bed. There's no street traffic. And suddenly this car pulled out, and two people jumped out of the car. And I thought, wow, that's really strange. And I looked closer, and they both had backpacks on. And I thought, that's even stranger. And I thought, well, maybe they're starting the tour. And they both came up to me, and they went through the arch, and they were celebrating. And I thought, I asked them, I said, did you guys just finish or are you starting? And they go, no, we just finished. And I said, I just finished 5 minutes ago too. And I don't know where they got their car from. Like someone drove them to this point. And I don't know where they picked this car up, but they got driven to the arch, and they dropped out. Like literally 5 minutes after I finished, they finished. And so they were celebrating, and they had me take pictures of them under the arch. And so there were the three of us under this arch at 1:30 in the morning in the middle of Leuche, and everybody else was sleeping. I found the water fountain in Marie, where I originally filled my water, and I think I drank about 6 liters of water straight. I just kept drinking water. I couldn't drink enough water. And I filled my water bottle up again. It's all beautiful glacier water too, so it's nice and cool and clean. And I drank about 6 liters of water. The other guy went and got his truck. He went to his house and he got his truck and he came up and picked the other guy, and they drove off. So I was there by myself in the tourist office. I slept on the bench. And literally about 20 minutes after I arrived, the skies opened up and it just absolutely poured. And it didn't stop raining from that point. So it was around 1:45 in the morning. It didn't stop raining until probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was heavy rain coming down, really heavy. And there was a really strange event. Because I basically blew up my thermarest, and there was a bench there near the tourist office. I blew up my thermarest, and I tried to make myself a bit of a bed. There was no place for me to go. I had to wait in the morning for the bus to come from Les Houches to Chamonix, and I think it came at 5:58 in the morning, and it was like 1:45. So I had about 4 hours to sleep, or not sleep, but at least rest, which was quite welcomed. The other thing is those two guys it was kind of funny because everyone was, having done this descent, you basically become like stilt man, and you can't walk anymore. You're literally like a stilt man, kind of like amble walking, and everyone was stilt walking, which I thought was kind of funny. None of us could bend our knees by that time because of that huge descent coming off. I think that they said that's the biggest descent on the tour, this one here. And by the time you finish it, your legs are absolutely quite sore. Let's put it that way. And you have a pretty hard time walking. I was definitely having trouble walking by the time I got to Les Houches. My legs were having done this. What was it? 31.6 kilometers. 1,700 meters of ascending and 1,910 meters of descending. So it was absolutely the peak hiking day for me. Like literally, I think the other one was like 24. So I think the other high point was 24. So this is like another 8 kilometers more than I'd done before. And usually I was around 2,000 meters ascending and descending. So this is like 3,600. So that's almost twice as much what I was used to. So it was a massive day, obviously. It wasn't really intended to be, but thankfully I got into Les Houches, and then, like I say, literally 20 minutes later, the skies opened, and it was a constant downpour of rain. Had I still been on the tour or slept, had I decided to sleep somewhere as those guys did, whoever was sleeping in that region there, it was a heavy rain. It wasn't a thunderstorm, but it was definitely heavy rain. As the woman in Les Chaux-Soleil had said, it was going to rain, and she was right. But again, kind of like the other time when I heard that the variant 1A, they were right. It just happened later than they said it would, because she said it was going to later in the day, and it actually was late in the morning the next day. But it did. The skies opened up, and it was coming down heavy and steady. But I was under a bit of there was on the tourist office, there's a bit of a veranda, so I was dry. Although I was just in my pants and shirt, and I put my down jacket on. I had my beanie on, and I had my thermarest on this bench, and I simply tried to sleep there. Not sleep, but just rest there for 4 hours, which was fine. All things being equal. The other thing I wanted, like I said, there was this strange occurrence. As I was sleeping, of course it's raining, so you're getting lots of noise from the rain hitting everything. I heard this person screaming, and it sounded like they were saying help, but I couldn't be certain, and it sounded like it was coming from, basically, because Les Houches is here, and it sounded like it was coming from around the tour. In that direction, at least. I mean, it's all pitch black. You can't see anything, and you got the city lights here. But the sound, it seemed to be coming from that direction, and I heard them, and they were screaming. They were definitely screaming. But what they were screaming, I don't know. And you could hear it over the rain, but not distinctly. So I couldn't make out if they were saying help or what they were saying, or if it was just kids screaming, like some teenagers at night screaming. I don't know what the source of it was. So the first time I heard it, I thought maybe, you're kind of just hearing things. It's not. And then it repeated itself probably about 4 times over 20 minutes. So like, someone was screaming and it didn't last long, but you would kind of hear something, and then, it kind of, the rain muffled it away, and maybe 5 minutes later it came again. So it sounded like someone was screaming for help in the rain, and it sounded like it was coming from the direction of the tour. But I didn't. There's nothing you can do, even if someone was calling for help. If it wasn't raining, you could hear them. There's really not much you can do. But yeah, I heard that, which was kind of a bit unsettling, and nothing you want to hear at night. But I don't know what it was. I can't even say for sure if it was someone screaming help, or if it was just kids, some teenagers out having fun and just screaming for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it was a bit disconcerting, I would say, to end everything. But that was the end of my tour. I was thankful it was over. In some ways, in other ways, I had built up such a routine of, going to sleep. You pitch the tent, you go to sleep, you wake up at 5, you get your gear together, and you're hiking at 6 a.m. and you've been doing that for the past 11 days for the most part. On the 12th day, you feel like doing the same. To be honest with you, you get into a nice routine. At first, it's difficult, but after doing it for 11 days, it's kind of becomes a nice routine. And on this day, I didn't. On the next day, I didn't get to do that, so that was a bit of a shock in the wrong direction. And you're missing all these great views that you were seeing, especially in this section in here. So you don't get to see this as much as you did each morning. So that was a bit of a loss. But again, I think the lack of water through here is just it's inexcusable. I don't know how the French government can honestly say that they know the hike route goes through here, and to not have water sources along that route, which is 32 kilometers of hiking. Okay, let's say everyone's starting in Tres Le Champ on that day. Regardless if you go this way or you go the route I took, you basically have 25 to 30 kilometers of hiking in front of you. And for the French government to not have water taps with drinkable water, not this non-potable. I don't know why they have non-potable taps, and I don't know why they don't have water taps through here. Even if they have to drill wells, it's inexcusable in my mind. It's almost criminal that there's no water taps along here. And had I known, I obviously would have, stocked up on water, at least at La Flégère in that refuge. I would have grabbed about 3 or 4 bottles of water if I knew, but there's no other sector in the tour that it has such a long section without any water taps. So it's really criminal. I don't know. I can't even explain it. It's such a bad thing to not have water here. I think what happens, to be honest with you, I don't think a lot of hikers finish the tour. I think a lot of them stop at La Flégère and simply go down to Chamonix, and then make their way into Les Houches and say hooray, I've done it. But I don't think a lot of hikers actually do this section. That's my feeling. It's kind of like the La Folie section. A lot of hikers are bypassing it with bus transfers, and I think a lot of hikers, and it's not, I don't have anything to support that other than I didn't see very many hikers on this section, so that tells you right away that if people aren't coming up the trail or down the trail regardless of the weather, because everybody has to hike during the day. And I think I passed from La Flégère to Les Houches that day. I passed probably 10 hikers at most, over 30 kilometers, and what was that, 18 hours of hiking, and on a normal day, at say 20 kilometers, I would pass maybe 50. So it tells me that I don't think many hikers do this sector. I think they just take the cable car down, grab a bus, and go to Laouche, and or maybe in the case of the people I met that morning, maybe they just get someone to drive them and drop them off at Laouche. I don't know. I'm not saying they didn't hike it, but they weren't coming from the right direction. They weren't coming from this direction. They were coming from this direction in a car. And I think a lot of people just take the cable car down to Chamonix, where actually it's going to be out in this section. They take the cable car down to Chamonix, and then they simply either take a bus or possibly walk on the roads to Laouche and then call it a day. This is really it's got a bad reputation, this drop, because it's so long and so tedious, and it seems to never end, and obviously it's quite steep, and I don't think a lot of people are hiking it. That's my impression, but I could be wrong. I don't want to say people aren't, but I didn't meet very many people hiking when I did it. So that was my experience overall. Let's just go forward. We talked about that. So this is the hiking summary. I tried to do the tour on a budget, and all the money I spent on the tour itself, I'm not talking about when I went to Courmayeur and stayed in a hotel and had meals, or when I was flying in and getting meals in airports and things like that. And I'm talking about actual money spent on the tour. I don't have an exact figure, but it was probably around 671 pounds, or about 773 USD. Like I say, that excludes the air flight, the hotels, and I didn't include my gear in this cost. So that's literally just the money that I spent on the tour itself, and that was eating in refuge, or I had some meals in the restaurant in Lac Champex, buying iced teas, which are quite expensive at €5, and I was probably drinking about 4, 5, 6 of those a day. And going to boulangeries and patisseries and having quiche and ham and cheese sandwiches and tartelettes, and restocking in the markets, the shopping malls, and the cafes, etc., etc. I didn't drink any alcohol, just to so this is fairly. I would say this is comfortable, having to pay for food in the campsites, pay for the campsites. I think this is comfortable, but it probably could be reduced. And I would say cost reduction would be more carrying food from the grocery. I didn't do that. I probably could have reduced my cost simply by buying, again, not knowing the tour, not knowing where these services are available, what's available, where's the next one between services. It's difficult to try to gauge and budget your food intake and costs and all the rest. But now knowing the tour, I would have probably invested more in grocery shopping and carrying more food than I did. It puts more load on your rucksack, but I probably would have, basically to reduce costs, I would have had more grocery shopping. And then done more stealth camping. I probably would have avoided some of the campsites. I know now that the Champex Lac campsite that I stayed in, I paid €14 for 2 nights each night. If I had hiked forward about another 3 kilometers, I think there was a good spot to stealth camp. But of course, it was raining heavily that night, so and I didn't know where I was going. So to find a stealth campsite at that time of night in the rain, and not knowing exactly if you'd find one, I ended up having to swallow the cost for the campsite, which it is what it is. You have to kind of do what you have to do, and I probably could have done with a few less cafes, some cappuccinos, maybe some a few less boulangerie and iced tea. So it is possible to reduce your cost further than what I'm showing, but I think for 11 days of hiking, if you divide that by 11, the overall cost per day was, I don't know what that is, 671 divided by 11 is probably what, 660 a day? 55 a day or something around there. 550, yeah, about 550. So about 55 euros a day. By the time I tried to have at least one good meal a day. Actually, I didn't eat more than one good meal a day. So whether it was a plate of pasta in the refuges, which was around 14, 18, 20 pounds, if you had, some iced tea and tart, you're probably around 20, 25 pounds. Depends on how much you ate, but it doesn't take too much to get to 50, by the time you get some drinks and the like. So it's basically averaging about 50 pounds, 50 euros a day, 55 euros a day. I think I could have done better. Knowing what I know now, I know I could have done better, but that's where I came in. I had 4 nights of stealth camping for free in Air de Bivouacs or in the Valveni or in the Grand Col. All those nights were free, and then I had 4 nights in paid campsites over the 8 days. And the price on these was, like I say, relatively reasonable. I think it was like 8 euros, 14 euros, and 12 euros or something. So not too extreme, but still it adds up. It wasn't always easy to secure a stealth site. And then, you do yearn for a shower, especially if you're used to one every day. And I actually only had, I had a shower in the hotel in Courmayeur, obviously, but on the tour itself, I only had one shower in Champex-Lac. They had a shower facility, and I used it. But that was the only shower I had. And again, it was good to stay a little bit less than floral and scented smelling to keep the insects away. They tended not to come along when you didn't have a shower for more than a day. It's a good way to keep insects off of you, although it doesn't keep... it also keeps people off of you, away from you. If it's the social club group, maybe it was a good idea. Total ascents, so that I've put all the numbers together over the hike. So these are the 8 days that I hiked. These are the distances each day that I hiked. So you can see roughly that was my daily pattern. So I started off relatively weak and then built up. And then I had a drop off, but this was during the Fenêtre des Arpents, so the distance was short, but the ascent and the descent were quite high. And then the last day, which was the Olympian day, 32 kilometers. And I know there's hikers out there who are doing 40, 50 kilometers in a day. Starting off at 13.8, and then having a 33 kilometer day, that's almost double of it's more than double what my lowest was. So it was a big day for me, definitely a huge day, especially with this amount of ascending and descending, 4,009 total meters of ascending and descending, which was far above anything I did during the tour, at least more than 1,200 meters more than anything else. So that's the stats each day. This is the total ascent and descent. I used Komoot to come up with these numbers. So you basically go on Komoot and you follow the path, and it gives you these numbers. If you're wondering where I've got these numbers, how accurate these numbers are, I'll show you that they're not as accurate as a GPS tracking system. Unfortunately, my GPS tracking system didn't get all the data for all the days, and I've got one day, this day, GPS tracking system on my Garmin watch. Unfortunately, I had patchy data for the rest of the tour, and if I do it again, I would definitely keep that data tracker going and get much better numbers, because I think these numbers they're accurate to a degree, but they're not as good, obviously, as a GPS tracker system is going to do for you. So they're as good as the system itself provides, which is, it's reasonable, but it's not necessarily accurate. So my daily average kilometers was 21.25. The ascending was 1350. The descending was 1250 for a total of 2,600 meters on average over those 8 days. That was the 170 kilometers. It's probably more than that, given the GPS tracker system compared to Komoot. I think these are conservative. I think the actual numbers are higher than what we're seeing here, but you got to go by something. So I've used commute to go, and it basically comes to 170. The ascent was 10,770, and the descent was 1050. So yeah, this is the total ascent descent by hike day. So you can see the comparison between ascending and descending. There's a lot of ascending at the start. It then is a really heavy descending day, followed by a heavy ascent. Then again, another heavy days for descending. And then this monster with both high ascending and descending. These numbers here, 1,500, 2,000. It gives you a good idea what I did each day. So you can see it's quite ascending is quite heavy at the start, and then descending is quite heavy at the end of the second half of the tour. Although you still get quite a bit of ascending going on, but it gives you a good idea roughly what you're looking for, or what you're going to need to prepare for. Here's my Garmin performance data. So I had it working for section 1 of the hike. The total time on that hiking day was 8 hours and 21 minutes. So that's from Les Houches to Refuge Miage. Took 8 hours and 21 minutes of hiking. I don't know if that's moving time. I think that might be total daytime. So I was stopping in the cafe for lunch and obviously having rest as I walked. So I don't think that's total hiking time. I think that's total daytime, which would have been from roughly 9:30 a.m. till probably, like I say, 5:30 at night. I think I ended. So that's total time of the day rather than the hike. I burned 2,366 calories. I'm not sure how accurate that is. My pace was 11 minutes and 42 seconds for each kilometer of the kilometers I traveled. There was the GPS tracker said it was 14.69 kilometers for this route. And this is coming from Garmin. This map is Garmin map, so it's literally plotting all these GPS routes or GPS points on the route. And the commute, when I did the same route in commute, it came to 13.8, and the Garmin map basically said 14.7. So that's why I say I think these numbers on this table here are quite conservative. The actual Garmin data showed it to be almost a full kilometer more than what the commute map says. Same thing with the ascent. The actual ascent was 1364 and commute said it was 1270. The descent 819 and commute said it was only 720. So the total here was 2183 and commute said it was only 1990. So it's really unfortunate I wasn't able to capture this data for the entire tour. I really would have liked to have seen all the numbers. The problem I was having, there's a couple problems with the Garmin watch. I was turning it on and off, so when I was hiking, I wanted to capture actual moving time. I didn't want to capture data when I was sitting in the cafe, so I was trying to turn it on and off when I stopped. Even when I was stopping just for like a 10-15 minute rest, I was trying to turn it on and off. And unfortunately, what was happening is I would turn it off and then forget to turn it on, or vice versa. I would turn it on and forget to turn it off. So I was capturing lots of nonsense data. So that was one thing, just me not turning it on and off at the correct times. And then thinking I turned it on and I didn't turn it on, so I didn't capture any data. And eventually you just, if you, instead of capturing the full hike, you're just capturing a sector of it. So what good is it? It's basically useless data. I wanted to capture each sector that I did in this format, but unfortunately I didn't. The other thing was charging the battery at altitude and then in the cold. Lower temperatures at high altitude decrease battery efficiency and can lead to longer changing times, and that's what I was finding. To charge my watch was taking a long time, and it was also taking a lot of energy from the battery pack, which I needed for my cell phone. So I had a choice between keeping the cell phone charged or the battery on the watch charged. And to be honest with you, sometimes at night I forgot to charge either one or both, or I was charging the cell phone and I forgot to switch it back to the Garmin. watch, and eventually the battery died on the Garmin, and I didn't have it, so I started hiking with a dead battery on my watch. So it was really not well coordinated, and I should have done a better job of it. But I had much bigger things to concern myself with, to be honest with you, than getting my Garmin watch charged. There were a lot of other things going on in the hike. Having done this for the first time, that the Garmin watch charging of the battery seemed to be something that was less important. But I did get data, and complete data for one day, which is good to compare against the commute to ensure that, I'm doing conservative numbers here compared to what I actually did. So I'm likely far higher than the traditional tour route, which is 170. I could be up to maybe 190, and this could have been up to maybe 12,000, and again, this could be up to maybe 10,500 or 11,000 meters. I'm saying that based on what I'm seeing here, the numbers that Garmin spit out and the numbers that Commute spit out, we're talking quite a bit of a difference so these are conservative in comparison. I had an average heart rate of 105 beat per minute. And I mean, there's sections that are stressful, but I didn't feel like physically taxed at any point where it was like, oh, I'm completely exhausted, I can't carry on. I never felt that way. My pace was 32 steps per minute, and I did almost 15,000 steps. Now, this is an interesting number, because I think probably about 80% of the steps that you take are going to be technical, meaning you have to look where your foot's landing and make sure it's not on a rock or you're going to trip or fall. So you're concentrating for about 80% of these steps on any sector, and sometimes higher and sometimes lower. But you can imagine if let's say it's 15,000 steps times eight stages, and this was the shortest stage. Let's say it's higher than, let's say it's 20,000 steps on some of the longer stages, times 8, that's 160,000 steps you have to make correctly, meaning you're not going to twist your ankle, you're not going to stumble, you're not going to fall. You can see it's stacked against you. And over the entire tour, so let's say it's 200,000 steps I took, I had 2 slips descending, where I basically landed on my behind. I had 2 falls, and I had 3 twisted ankles. So in total, I had 7 missteps out of 200,000 steps. Let's say, for instance, that's the kind of accuracy you need. That's why you have to concentrate so hard to not make those missteps. And you know, those 3 missteps, that could have been a broken ankle. Those falls could have been off the edge. You know, they could have either been serious injuries or a fatality. And the other slips, I mean, I could have slid down the side of the mountain as well. So out of those 200,000 steps, I've got I got 7 of them wrong out of 200,000. And yet still I could have, you know, I did get a bit injured, but I could have got much more seriously injured. So that's why you have to concentrate so hard, and especially on the descents. Don't talk on the descents. Focus and concentrate what you're doing. You've got to make a lot of right steps. And there's times where, you know, if you make a misstep, you seriously could be killed. The Col de Tricot descent on this day was 550, so that's at the peak and down to the Miage, so it's 552 meters of descent, and that's over 1.96 kilometers. So you can figure out the gradient on that one. It's steep, as I showed you before. You can see it here. That's this is the rise. You can see what that's like, and there were sections, as you recall, of quite high gradient, but you can see how steep that drop is off of the Col de Creux. It doesn't look it here, but in relationship to what you climb up, it's quite precipitous. That took me, that section there, that 2 kilometers took me 1 hour and 19 minutes to traverse. Yeah. So, you know, these descents are hard. It's difficult to obtain accurate hiking data with a GPS tracker or without a GPS tracker, I should have said. And then the hiking stats are based on Commute program, and they don't show a great correlation, to be honest. But not having any other data to go off. I've used Komoot. Failed to maintain a performance record, as I mentioned, and that's again because of the weather and the altitude. Lower temperatures, again, I already mentioned that. So if you look over here, the heart rate zone on this section, you've got zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Most of it was zone 2 with a little bit in zone 1, and then actually getting into zone 3 and even zone 4, which is aerobic threshold. This 3 is aerobic. 4 is easy. They call 4 easy. If you're a cyclist, you'll know about heart rate zones. So that gives you an idea the how strenuous that hike was, at least for myself. This here is the elevation. This is the pace I was keeping, and this was my heart rate basically being monitored. As you can see here, you're climbing up this section here. It's quite taxing. It starts to level off, and then you've got this big drop here, and you can see even though you're descending, your heart rate's increasing over, say, what it was up here. Your heart rate's actually increasing during the descent, which is a bit unusual. So all in all, it's great data. I'm just disappointed I wasn't able to capture this picture for all 8 days, and especially on some of the the real the Fenêtre d'Arpet route and the last Olympian route. I would have liked to have had this data to review, but sadly I wasn't able to catch up this time. So something to look forward to should I do it again. Those are the numbers there that are typed in, so that's coming right from the Garmin watch, the 14.69. The time here, 7 hours. I don't know, that doesn't agree with 7 hours. That might be the moving time, and this may have been the total daytime. So it may have been moving time 7 hours, because Garmin does moving time and they also do elapsed time. So maybe the elapsed time was 8 hours 21 and the actual moving time was 7 hours. So I basically rested, which makes sense. I rested for about an hour and 20 minutes throughout the day, which I think makes sense. So the actual hiking time for 14 kilometers was 7 hours. That's the average pace. I don't know what that pace, I think that pace doesn't seem right. 28 minutes per kilometer. I'm not sure what that came from. And that's the total descent, 1364, and the calories. I don't know how accurate that calories count is, to be honest. It may not be that accurate on the Garmin. So that's it for this this part, and we'll continue on the next part.